Well, thanks everyone. This is Juan Radriguez and giving you another welcome into our podcast with Dr. Rakhee Gupta. And I thank everyone for really being here, especially the guest that we have today is a very special guest. And really love the opportunity of sharing a lot of the information because the most important thing when we were speaking this morning, Dr. Clyde Wilson, it's been, in the field of nutrition, in the field of metabolism for more than 25 years. But the most important thing that I heard from you this morning that really got me thinking was that sometimes we make the mistake, including myself, a huge mistake that eating healthy is going to make us healthy. And you say that that's not necessarily the case. That will be something that I want you to elaborate on. And I know you have so much information that is going to make us a totally different people by just taking a different approach on metabolism that is further than just nutrition and just eating. So, Rakhee, anything that you want to say to our prime guest?
Welcome, and a lot of things to discuss. There are many people who ask me, or they tell me that they're trying to lose weight or they're trying to burn fat, and so they're wondering how to go about it.
Yeah.
So thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. To both of you, Juan and I go back more than a decade, and so it's fantastic to finally be talking on the record. And to that issue of weight loss, it's interesting how strongly or 100% overlap there is between how to think about healthy weight gain, weight maintenance, and weight loss, which is to focus on your lean tissue. Our highest metabolic rate comes from our lean tissue, not from our body fat. A person who's wanting to go up in healthy weight wants most of that to be lean tissue, of course. A person who wants to get the most out of life at their current weight takes care of their lean tissue, which can easily shift their body composition in the positive direction, reduce disease risk. And for a person who's trying to lose weight, they want to minimize their lean tissue loss. And that's really at the heart of long-term sustainable weight loss. So on the topic of the weight loss piece, if you're getting the yo-yo dieting effect, where every time you try to lose weight, there seems to be this faster weight gain afterwards, possibly to a higher weight than ever. That is a clear indication, not that you're more gluttonous or that you have, you're moving into disordered eating necessarily, or that you're more stressed and are doing more stressed eating, but that you might have lost muscle mass during your weight loss effort. I call this the yo-yo dieting effect. And increasingly, I've been calling it the intermittent fasting effect and the Ozempic effect. So when we don't meet our body's needs nutritionally, or if stress is high or sleep quality is low, cortisol goes up, breaks down some muscle mass. It's unfortunate that the body doesn't just survive on lipids, because if it did, we could stop eating and only burn fats. And then when we've lost enough fat, start eating again. Unfortunately, I joke with my students, our cells are alive every moment of our lives, not just when we're eating. And they don't only need fats. They constantly want amino acids to rebuild the proteins that are degraded over time. So when our brain sees amino acid level go less than 80% of normal, 1 millimolar, our blood protein level is about 1/5 of our normal blood sugar level. When either blood sugar or blood protein drops below about 80%, and that's where we wake up in the morning at about 80%, some of us less. If you're pre-diabetic, of course, higher because of liver glycogen release. Then the brain triggers a cortisol release from our adrenal glands to break down our muscle mass. There's no storage site for protein in the body. So the body uses our lean tissue to supply our skeletal muscle mass, to supply protein to our more vital organs, heart, lungs, kidneys, brain. And so this is called, in the research community, this is called a selfish brain hypothesis, that our organ systems are competing for nutrients on the same bloodstream. So it is a competitive ecosystem, and the brain will always win. The brain does not prioritize our skeletal muscle mass the way an athlete does, or the way a sedentary dieter does, since that's our main fat-burning machinery that we are in control of. So in what way are we in control of it? You can imagine a video game with toggles, and our toggles are stress, sleep, nutrition, and movement. And in my research at UCSF with Narman Naber and Roger Cook, our PI, we published just under 2 years ago the research on the mechanism whereby the body shuts down if the gap between what your body needs and gets is too large, which is about 25%. And subjectively, you could see a direct correspondence between all 4 metabolic toggles of stress, sleep, nutrition, and movement, where the gap between what optimizes the body and what we're delivering to the body, like sleep quality, nutrients, where that gap is too large for the body to easily be able to optimally sustain itself. Body's very adaptable. It can do a lot if you give it something, at least a little bit of what it needs. Like a little bit of gas in your car, you get to work. No gas at all, you're not going anywhere, right? So the body can adapt to small amounts, large amounts of things to a tremendous degree. But it really struggles when you're not giving it anything. Like, let's say your stress is high, you work till right before you go to bed, 4 hours later you're up, you never get the deep delta wave sleep. Now you just reduced your DNA gene expression and you can't make as much use of all the healthy eating. And to Juan's point earlier, our previous conversation, if you're not drinking much water, you can't process as much as your nutrients. And so you won't make as much use of the food that you're eating. It doesn't matter how healthy the salad is. And if the salad's low in protein, your body will use your lean tissue for that. If it's low in fats, you're going to compromise your endocrine immune system, central nervous system, because there's not enough omega-3 fats at the synapses for the brain to even send a signal. That's where the highest concentration of omega-3 fats is. So you can be omega-3 fat starved. You can be water starved. We call it dehydration. You can call it protein starved. And this is what's happening when we think peanut butter is a protein, and it's only 10% protein, just like bread is. So if you call peanut butter a protein, you have to call bread a protein. And it's fine to call bread a protein because every living cell, everything we eat has a protein in it. But for us to call it a protein implies that it's dense enough that a relatively small amount meets our needs. So if we think something's a protein food that really isn't, or if we think that the body can only it can get by just by burning fat, so we don't have to eat anything at all and go through some rigorous intermittent fasting program, or if we think we can exercise without increasing nutrient flow, we end up losing the very lean tissue that we're trying to protect. And it's the gap. You have to mind the gap, as they say in train stations and subway stations. And we need to do the same with our metabolic toggles. If the gap between the sleep that you need and what you get, the stress response to reduce cortisol adrenaline release that you need, and if you're not doing that, if you need movement to keep your muscles idling to achieve your metabolic goals, and then nutrition, which has a few moving parts within it, right? Your food groups, micronutrients. So metabolic.
One thing, Dr. Wilson, when you're speaking, I'm sorry for the interruption, but you're going to continue exactly on the same thing. But just to corroborate something that I heard, I work with a lot of high performance people, sports professional teams, as you have as well. And one of the things I remember one person told me, after the training, after the game, if you do not feed yourself something nutritious, your body is going to start eating itself. And it's like you got to feed something 10 minutes after or 20 minutes after a workout or something like that. And is that sort of specifically what you're saying as well? Your body's so smart that your brain is like so intelligent that it prioritizes on, finding the sources where it needs it, even from its own self.
Absolutely. And so the training, whether it's physical trauma, minor surgery, exercise, which is kind of can be cumulatively over the course of a year, the equivalent of a minor surgery in terms of healing, but distributed throughout the body, of course, and that increases the need. And if you don't increase the nourishment to meet that need, then you can undo the benefits of the exercise. And of course, at the level of an athlete, that really just exacerbates the issue. And studies with athletes show that there can be overreaching symptoms after a single workout, and certainly within just a week. And once it gets to where it takes over a year, 1 year or more to recover, then we call it something different, overtraining, which I've seen only too often. When I was with the San Jose Earthquakes, we were getting a lot of data on their muscle and body fat distribution through DEXA scans, doing blood panels every 2 months. And you could see, I mean, I've never gotten that much data in my life on a group of athletes, right? I mean, it was fantastic. It was like collecting data for a research project. And you could see how athletes earlier in their career who weren't providing enough nourishment, that their immune system was overreactive, trying to compensate for their inability to heal. So they'd have high levels of high sensitivity C-reactive protein, and you'd see an elevated profile in their white blood cell counts. So the body was kind of in overdrive, trying to accelerate the healing process. You'd see a loss in some of their endocrine parameters, like lower testosterone. Growth hormone is really too sporadic to just do a single point blood draw to really say anything there. So you could see correlations in their endocrine, their immune system, their ability, their muscle mass. We had some of the top athletes losing 5 pounds of muscle in their legs at peak season because they weren't able to heal.
5 pounds?
That's a lot. Metabolism. Just a year and a half ago, there's a study looking at athletes as well as novices that start a workout routine for the first time in their lives. And after a few weeks of ramping up their training where they couldn't heal, they're burning less fat than before they started working out. So you can potentially burn less fat exercising than if you didn't exercise at all. The key is to heal from exercise. We don't benefit from anything we don't heal from. This is true psychologically and physiologically. So the gap just widens with athletic levels of training and trying to get leaner for a higher power to weight ratio. Most sports, power to weight ratio matters because how heavy you are determines how much force you have to apply to change directions. We call that agility. Mm-hmm. So agility is critical in combat sports, field sports, racket sports. I mean, unless you're doing Olympic lifting, powerlifting, shot put, then it's okay to have a high body fat. But if you're a competitive cyclist, I mean, you have to think about what is the weight that I'm required to accelerate with the power that my muscle is able to generate. And so athletes are looking for the highest power to weight ratio. And if your nutrition's not good, you might be under eating. And like studies with athletes show that every hour that you delay eating when you wake up increases body fat by 0.3%. So if you don't eat a substantial meal after you wake up and you're waiting 3-4 hours, you're going to be 1% higher in body fat. So for every 100 pounds that you weigh, you're 1 pound heavier in body fat just because you delayed eating. And that's irrespective of how much you eat and what you eat and how hard you train.
Wow.
And the same is going to be true with an intermittent faster. There's a study out of UCSF published also about 2 years ago. They took 212 subjects, they had them intermittently fast, and they lost twice the muscle as body fat. If you told someone that by fasting, you're going to lose more muscle than body fat and make it practically impossible to keep losing weight after 1 month or ever keep the weight off, and that the chances are you will have a higher body fat than ever because of having tried, unless you're going to start powerlifting to recover the muscle loss, who's going to do that? So you shoot yourself in the foot by trying too hard. I call it eating too healthy or trying too hard. There are so many smart, motivated, well-meaning people trying to do right by fasting, by working too hard. They don't think about stress management. They don't take into consideration the importance of their sleep quality. They'll just count how many hours they're sleeping. They don't think about how rested they wake when they feel when they wake up. They don't think about their sleep architecture. They're just, well, I had 6 hours of sleep, that's enough. And they don't think about the quality of their sleep. they'll work to the last minute where they never get into the delta sleep, and they don't think about stress management throughout the day. And then they'll skip meals, and they'll think, based on the calorie balance model, that's good. Because if you're only using a calorie balance model, then you'd think, well, if I don't eat most of the time, that's good, right? I'm moving more, I'm doing my workouts, and I'm not eating. So that's the calorie balance model. So when we take pieces of information about moderation from Hippocrates that's over 2,000 years ago, or from wellness experts like ourselves, when we're, people who work in this field, the word moderation can really trip people up, because the more intensive somebody's goals, the more likely they are to ignore the word moderation and just assume that if they sledgehammer, I call it the sledgehammer approach. If I just do more and more and more, eventually my body will break and finally give me what I'm after. Well, guess what? It's going to break and not give you what you're after. That's ultimately what we're after, right? Okay, so
before you go any further, I have a question, because it's crucial what you were saying on the sense of the quality of the sleep. Let's say I'm not and you can tell I'm not an athlete. So, and most people that perhaps listen to our podcast are not athletes. I mean, I hope they are. But how do you manage the quality of the sleep if you are just a regular person? How do you really focus on that so much that you get not just 6 hours of sleep, but let's say 5 hours of quality sleep that would be much better than 10 hours of non-quality sleep?
Well,
I look at everything.
Is sleep something that you can control, or can you affect the quality of your sleep though? Because once you're asleep, there's not much you can't. You're unconscious. You know what I mean?
I don't know. That's why I wanted to ask Dr. Wilson, because he's like passionate about this. Like, honestly, I haven't seen anybody, so that's why I really wanted that advantage. Can you really do something like Rakhee's saying? Monitor your sleeping, define the quality of your sleep?
How do you modify the quality of your sleep?
So I look at everything through the lens of metabolism, as opposed to all the aspects of benefits that sleep provides, and all of the conditions that optimizes sleep, right? And so there are experts in that field, as there are experts in stress management and positive psychology like Juan, right? And so my wheelhouse is metabolism. And so I'm just going to stick to responding through that lens. So there is a fantastic review published in Nature on this topic, the metabolism associated with our circadian rhythm. And this review, and this might be one of the papers that we link to for this conversation, talks about how every cell in our body has a version of sleep. We usually think of sleep as like a brain thing, right? It's a brain function. It reconsolidates the memories, makes room for new ones, and there's all kinds of reasons for this. The metabolic waste is cleared out by the pumping of astrocytes, mainly during deep sleep, because there's no lymph system in the brain. There's no room. The neurons have to be close to send signal quickly enough to maintain consciousness, and for nerve signaling, for reactions, even. So there's a lot of reasons for sleep separate from what I'm about to focus on here, which is the metabolic aspects. So in this review that I will link you to, shows how our cells all have a dormancy phase. So when our brain is sleeping, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the XCN, will try to coordinate sleep of all of our organ systems, meaning that our cells go more into dormancy. What does that mean? What that means, as this review discusses, is that our cells shift from the high energy protein production and signaling between each other, they shift to DNA gene expression, to increase RNA content, so that we can make better use of our lifestyle choices when we're awake, right? So this is the very first step of our metabolic flow, is DNA gene expression to create those RNA threads that are going to be read by our ribosomes to assemble amino acids into the proteins that then assemble the lipids and the membranes and everything else, so that our cells can maintain their vitality, so that our organ systems, and therefore we, can maintain our vitality. And what this, I love the diagram in this review paper. And so that's why, sending a link is so important, so you can see this image. It's the authors of this paper, they visualize it as a circadian rhythm of each individual organ system. So if you eat food late, your gastrointestinal system is not allowed to sleep with the rest of you. If you're working on deadline to the last minute before you go to sleep, there are parts of your brain which will not sleep as deeply as other parts. If you do hard exercise late in the day that stimulates a large adrenaline release, then your peripheral nerves and your skeletal muscle will not be allowed to sleep as deeply as the rest of you. So I think of the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the brain as the conductor for an orchestra, trying to get the body to go to sleep together, and then we derange the harmony between our organ systems by overtaxing or insulting one of those organ systems with late eating, late psychological stress, or late intensive exercise. And so part of you can sleep where the rest of you becomes your bottleneck. So imagine if you take one of your organ systems that you overstimulate, so the rest of you is sleeping, that organ system is not, then that organ system has less DNA gene expression, less healing, and becomes your limiting organ system over time. And just like in your car, if you pull one engine part out, the whole sports car stops running, even though the rest of the car is perfectly fit and you're maintaining it and you're cleaning it with Q-tips in there so it can go to the auto show, and yet it won't run because you pulled one piece out. That's how our organ systems work together. You're no better than your weakest link, your limiting organ system, the limiting part of your mind, right? Like with post-traumatic stress disorder, that's the limiting part of your mind, or symptoms of depression and anxiety, of which I suffer both. That can easily become the limiting part of your mind. So I know from a nutritional perspective, a weight loss, and a performance perspective, as well as a psychological function perspective, what it's like to have one little piece that's critical pulled out, where you can't benefit fully from the rest.
Oh, pretty good. One thing that also, when you were speaking about, and I made a note of this because I consider it extremely important, the people that you were using the data from, the sports people up at San Jose.
Yeah, the earthquakes
you were saying the
is
people
generating
that,
tons of data.
Right, but you were saying that the people that came from a background where they were malnourished, and the reason why I'm asking this is because I think the teams that I have done a lot of work with in Mexico, I will say that 90% of them are malnourished. And maybe that is why they are not able to go and do performance, even if they have the abilities and the capabilities. The lacking part of not being able to perform at another level because of the malnourishment could be a crucial part.
Absolutely. So there's a review paper on overtraining published roughly a year ago, year and a half. And in their review of the literature, looking at the documented cases of overtraining, 84% are caused by undernutrition. And every single paper that looks at that considers carbohydrates specifically shows that overtrained athletes tend to eat closer to 4 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram per day, whereas athletes that are not feeling overtraining, experiencing symptoms, are eating closer to 8, literally double. Now, how much you eat isn't the end of the story. It's the flow of nutrients into the body. I'll call it nutrient flow as a part of your metabolic flow. So how you space out your carbohydrates can be more important than the amount that you're eating. But most intervention studies or observational studies don't necessarily take into account the timing. Sometimes and oftentimes they just look at the total amount. And so that would imply whether you spread it out over 12 feedings or only had 1 meal a day, that it wouldn't matter. And of course it does. The flow of nutrients matters. Now, the slower the digestion of a food, the less often you have to eat. And the more processed your foods, the less you should eat at any one time and the more frequently, just so that there's a flow of nutrients. Just like an IV drip when you're a hospital patient. You want the nutrients to come in at the rate that your lean tissue can use them so that you don't have an overflow of the system, generating a hormonal response that puts it into storage chronically, so that you end up with a poor body composition and ultimately inflammation from that contributes to disease risk.
So what do you do in the case of those players? Because I'm thinking I need to get you into the Mexican national team.
All right, this is easy. And I told
right now.
I told the head physician, team physician for the team, my friend Richard. I told him the reason these athletes A1C is going up, so they're like moving towards pre-diabetes, is because they're not healing their muscle mass. And I predicted that when I sat down and talked to them, and this is exactly what happened, that they weren't eating much when they woke up, and they weren't refueling their workouts right afterwards. So the deficit, the deepest deficit that we experience our day is when we wake up and haven't eaten since the previous day, and when we work out. When we wake up, the deficit is because the nourishment it hasn't happened in a while. After we work out, the deficit is because we've used up nutrients and increased the demand. So those are the two times where the gap is the largest, and those are the two times nobody wants to eat, because the adrenaline and the cortisol release that responds to waking up. I mean, cortisol and adrenaline is part of the natural waking up process. Our brainstem stimulates that to help us to wake up, and exercise stimulates the same fight or flight hormones, right? Cortisol is to recruit nutrients, and adrenaline is to increase the use of those nutrients. So cortisol and adrenaline are the 1-2 punch for our fight or flight response. And that increases metabolic rate in the short term, but it whittles away at it in the long term unless you heal from the episode. And so all three of these athletes weren't eating enough when they woke and after training because they didn't notice a need. Mindfulness in eating can't tell you it's time to eat if you don't notice. Mindfulness doesn't tell you what you're blind to. Mindfulness only tells you to pay attention to what you do notice. Now, once you hear this information, most athletes tell me, this is common sense. I wish I would have talked to you before. This isn't like guru stuff out of a black box, some weird diet. It's just, if you run your car and don't fill the tank, it stops working. So I can't tell you how many people I work with, athletes, sedentary, disease risk, competitive, that will take better care of their cat, dog, kids, car than they do themselves. They feed their kids breakfast, they feed their cat breakfast, they fill the tank on their gas, they change the oil, and they don't feed themselves. And somehow they get it in their head that the less they feed themselves, the better it is. So they don't just underfuel themselves. They'll fast. They'll try to do athletic ketosis, which is totally doable. If you refuel your muscles so that the muscle gets the glucose back in, then you can do the ketosis meals. And it doesn't pull you out of ketosis because your brain is driven into ketosis by liver glycogen levels. If you snip the vagus nerve in mice, they don't go into ketosis no matter what you do. The liver tells the brain to go into ketosis. So as long as you maintain low liver glycogen, you will stay in ketosis. So athletic ketosis is easy as long as you know how to deal with it. And now I'm not recommending ketosis. What I want is for people to be happy. If somebody comes to me and says, I want to do ketosis and I want to get to the Olympics, I'll be like, fine, we're going to work that. We're going to make that happen. And if they say, well, actually I like high carb, I'm like, okay, we're going to add salad to all this pizza you're eating to slow down its digestion rate. You're going to get to the Olympics. I don't care what you want. I want you to be happy. And you can make everything work as long as you know how the system works enough to get past the calorie balance model. The calorie balance model has led us astray. Now, for some people, they're exercising for health. So the increase in demand is not that intensive. And maybe they'll cut calories a little bit, but the gap isn't more than about 25% of their needs. And they lose weight, they're healthy, and they're like, well, calorie balance is working for me. But those aren't the people that talk to me. The ones that come to me is where it fails. So that's where we want the metabolic model to think about what keeps the body going, right?
So then, aren't these bad diets though? The keto diet or paleo diet, low carb? So you're saying that it's workable?
It is. Okay. I love this topic. This is my book chapter. So you go to my playlist and I go 90 minutes and I could have gone 900. All right. So let me try to give you the 1-minute version. There are so many people who think that we know that we should eat, right? So where do I start? Where do I get my numbers? When I tell an athlete, here's how much protein you need, or a sedentary person who's pre-diabetic, how much carbohydrate, protein, where do I get my numbers? The National Institute of Medicine at the National Institutes of Health and the World Health Organization at the United Nations basically recommend the same thing. And then you add to that recommendations from 3 governing bodies, American College of Sports Medicine, International Society for Sports Nutrition, the International Olympic Committee for Athletes. And basically what they say is that at high-level athletics, you need 3 times the protein as if the person wasn't working out, and that the carbohydrate has to correlate to contribute to their healing. You need some carbohydrate for your brain, for your activity level, and for your healing. So there's 3 reasons for carbohydrate, and so you juggle that a little bit, and the carbohydrate intake is going to modulate with your training level, right? So you use this well-known, well-published, well-researched information from these governing organizations, and then you divide your daily needs by the number of hours in the day. Now you know what you need per hour, and you multiply by the number of hours between meals. And that tells you how much to have in a meal to get you to the next meal, as long as you eat foods that digest slow enough to last that long, right? You can't take fast food and double up on how much you're getting from Chick-fil-A, McDonald's, or Burger King and Kentucky Fried Chicken. I love these places, but you can't get 2 bags of that and expect to last twice as long. It's going to process within a certain number of hours, and 6 to 8 hours later, your nutrient levels going down. Whether you ate 1,000 calories or 10,000 doesn't make any difference. We need nutrient flow. So you could potentially get by with 1 meal a day. If you start your day with it, you've got raw vegetables, lentils that take forever to digest, walnuts that have omega-3, and it can take like 8 to 10 hours to fully process that, so you don't enter the starved state until you go to bed, where you don't need as many calories. You could potentially get it done with 1 meal a day. What matters is your cell's experience, not yours. When you're not achieving your goals, you have to start thinking about what your body, your cells are experiencing. They don't know how many times you ate. They only know what's in the bloodstream. And so you take care of them by nourishing them through the bloodstream, whether that's nibbling or gorging, right? Gorging would be like 1, 2, at the most 3 meals a day. Nibbling would be like 6 to 12 feedings a day, where they're in smaller amounts. So these fad diets, they're not considering that nutrition has 2 layers, that there's a bottom maintenance layer where the National Institute of Medicine, the World Health Organization, has something to say about how much protein you need, carbohydrate for the brain, omega fats for your endocrine and immune system, right? That bottom layer is only 1/4 of your calories, at the very most 1/3 of your calories. You can eat whatever you want on top of that. It can be all fats when you're doing keto. It can be high protein, vegetables like the Pritikin and the Ornish diet. You can have your fuel layer be balanced like the Mediterranean diet. It doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter what car you buy, as long as you meet its minimum maintenance needs. And then you can drive it however you want. You can have a car that's driven by electric, by ethanol, by gasoline. You know, there's movies where it eats garbage and goes back to the future, right? Cars can eat anything that it's designed for, but they all have to have wheels and they all have to have a windshield. There's this minimum set of things that you need to create your body and to create a car. We're a very sophisticated vehicle, and we need to maintain that. The fuel layer on top can be anything that you want, as long as it digests slow enough to use it as fuel in the short term, instead of chronically overflowing into adipose, where you're not able to burn it quickly enough. And whatever carbohydrates you eat that you're able to use in the short term generates 3 times the power. The brain is a sugar hog. The way that our neurons are able to signal as fast as they are is not by burning fats. Now, you can adapt to ketosis and use ketones that are made from fats, but there are neurons in the brain, the GABA neurons, gamma aminobutyric acid, or the inhibitory neurons, that have to signal particularly fast, that do not adapt to ketosis very well, even in the deepest ketosis. And the liver can produce that carbohydrate for the brain, but your workout will rob the carbohydrate that the liver is producing for the brain. So even in ketosis, the brain wants at least 1/3 of its fuel to be sugar. And if you're not in ketosis, then it wants the majority, almost all, of its fuel to be sugar. And so the workout will deplete your blood sugar and freak out the brain, and the brain is in control of your endocrine system. And so it will trigger cortisol release from your adrenals to eat up your muscle mass. So your brain recruits the liver and your adrenals to eat you. You become your own food. And this is happening to athletes. Studies show that athletes, like endurance athletes, marathoners, et cetera, they'll come out of a marathon with liver glycogen depleted to where they're in ketosis every time they do a long run. Or if you're doing a century ride and you're under fueling in the ride. So there's athletes going in and out of ketosis every single day. Now, that's less likely in strength sports or power sports, because now you're mainly depleting muscle glycogen, because the training is more intense for a shorter episode of time. And which organ system you're trying to refuel, that determines what you're going to eat. I'm working with a top 10 ultra marathoner or ultra runner who does 1 to 7 day events. After 3 to 4 days of running, where he's only sleeping in 40-minute increments a few times a day. I mean, these are very intense competitions, you can imagine. Once he's completely depleted in glycogen, if he doesn't increase his carbohydrate intake in this run, he can barely even walk or stand up. So you have to change the nutrition as you go from the first half of the 7-day race to the second half. And the same is true in soccer. You'll notice that athletes who are practicing ketosis for at least half of their week, that when they come back from halftime, they looks like a junior high school team showed up, right? Their first half, they're a pro team, and then they can barely move in the second half. You know that these are athletes who are being misled into trying to maximize their power to weight ratio by only eating half the time or doing ketosis. And you can make ketosis work if you refuel your muscle right after your workout so that muscle doesn't keep depleting your blood sugar. But if you don't do that, then the ketosis will work, or the paleo or the low carb or the intermittent fasting will hurt the power athlete. And soccer and field sports in general are very high output. You're needing to accelerate and decelerate, including agility from side to side repeatedly. So these are high power output. So there's a tremendous amount of sugar use in our muscles. Now imagine one last thing, and then I'll turn it back over to you. Imagine that you're a soccer player and you're doing, your hard workout, which is, let's say, Tuesday, Thursday, right? So your hardest workouts of the week, and then you go a lighter one the day before a game, and then the day after the game, you don't work out at all, right? So there's these two workouts that are destroying you, and the rest of the workouts aren't. It's just the two hardest ones that are wrecking you. How's it wrecking you? Let's say you're doing a 90-minute hard training, and you're burning 1,000 calories, 1,200 calories, right? So let's say 1,000 calories, so 100 for each finger. And because it's bursts, the majority of that is glycogen loss, it's sugar loss, glucose use. And so out of that 1,000 calories, probably 800 calories is glucose, at least 700, right? And it depends on your position, right? I mean, if you're the goalie, then the percentage is higher from fat burning and a little bit less glycogen. If you're a striker, then there's episodes where you're inactive and then all of a sudden more active than anybody else on the team, right? And so it changes by position. But let's just assume, kind of average it out for all players. 1,000, at least 700, 800 is glycogen. And this is mostly going to be in your core and your legs. And there's a new study that came out where they pulled muscle fibers out of athletic individuals, and they showed that when the muscle belly, like your quadriceps, your glutes, your hamstrings, when they're depleted by 50%, let's say 800 calories is more than 50%. The legs are depleted by like 60%. That the most used muscle fibers in the muscle are depleted down to by 80 to 90%. There's only like 15% of the glucose left in those. If you don't get fuel back into them while the sugar transporters are still on the surface, which declines exponentially with a lifetime of about 30 minutes. So if you don't get the refuel in fairly quickly, there's an urgency for this that doesn't exist with protein. You can wait an hour with protein, you only lose an hour of healing. But if you wait an hour for carbohydrate, you're going to get more of an insulin response and more is going to go to body fat. The only way that you can heal is by going up in body fat at the same time. So there's an urgency for this. Water, refuel, and then optionally, and a good idea is to have protein with that. If you don't do that, imagine what happens. The muscle fibers that are the most depleted in glucose are not there for you in the next workout. And now you've changed your biomechanics and increased your sports injury risk. Because sports injury risk is known to occur when the main muscles that you're using fatigue before the rest of the muscles in your body, which then changes how the muscles generate force across your joints. And that's when you get connective tissue injuries and your tendons and ligaments. So whether it's back injuries, leg injuries, hip injuries, you're dramatically increasing your sports injury risk because of the change in biomechanics from the most used muscle fibers not being there for you in subsequent workouts. Think how much athletes are training for technique, how they run, how they cut and turn. And now you can't do what you were training for. All that biomechanical analysis changes because the most heavily used muscles aren't there for you, so that you're forced to use ancillary muscles like adductors and tensor fascia lata instead of your most heavily used muscle fibers in your quads and hamstrings. So you're increasing your sports injury risk in the short term. You're reducing your power output in the very next workout. And when fuel is low, mTOR, the mechanistic target of rapamycin, is downregulated to reduce gene expression for healing. When there's not enough fuel, your cells don't even try to heal. So you reduce your healing, you reduce your power, and you increase your sports injury risk all at the same time, just because you're going in the cold bath, doing the foam roller and talking to the coach instead of getting some refuel into the body. You absolutely have to prioritize it so that you can make use of each workout, get the most out of your training possible, and at the very least, stay healthy.
That's why I insist we need you the sooner the better over there. And the other thing is this, I love when you were saying about the sports injury, because I've seen with different teams, all of a sudden they go into this, they're losing a player and another player and another player. And it has to do with the way they're doing their training and the way they're not doing their nourishment after the facts of working out and all that kind of stuff. My very last question from me, I know Rakhee may have another one, but for me, my very last question is this. I love the analogy of the sports car, because actually yesterday we were speaking with Rakhee and I was making that analogy. And I want to use it in these terms. We were speaking about high performance people, but what about some advice for, people like myself, that, it's not high performance at all. I mean, people that are kind of, I need to get into obviously more exercise and stuff like that, but we are kind of slow and, like regular people. What kind of advice will you give them on this regard so that they can get a healthier lifestyle?
First and foremost, what I tell everybody, athletes, sedentary, and everyone in between, is that you need to be happy. And that happiness is both short and long term. Short term means eat what you like. Long term means modify to get your goals. But if you don't take point A with you, a happy person that you are today, to point B, you'll never get to point B. You have to take yourself with you. The diet has to feel like you. It can't feel like somebody else. It needs to be authentic. That's number one. So if there's foods that you like, you create your diet around that. You put yourself, your heart, at the very center. I won't work with somebody who won't agree with me on that. Anybody who says, I love pizza, but I'm going to stop eating it, it's bad for me, I won't work with them. I'll give them a keto
why?
diet.
I know what you're saying, but why? What would you tell them? It's like too drastic of a change, and it's not going to be good for them in the long run. Or what?
Anything that feels like work is not sustainable. Now, if you say to me, "Can I lose 19 pounds in 3 weeks?" Like my friend Scott, who I helped years ago, 19 pounds in 3 weeks. Sure, I'll put you on the cardboard diet. You're going to eat a bunch of lentils. That's what I call it, because that's how plain lentils taste, right? And he lost 19 pounds in 3 weeks. He's a master swimmer. His performance went up while he lost weight. He felt great.
Nice.
Instead of being depleted while he lost weight. He had done low carb. He had done fasting, and usually got cravings and fell off the wagon. And there was just no way. So I had him eating twice the volume of salad as pizza, and I didn't tell him how much pizza to eat. He could only eat half as much because he couldn't choke down enough salad to keep up. So your vegetable to carbohydrate ratio is like gear shifting. If somebody likes ketosis, they want that, no problem, because you're enjoying that. That's your groove. Then if you email me in a month, hey, can I change it up? I think I'm kind of tired of this. Absolutely. Right. So be happy is my number one. Right. But
that's why I say, let's go for the New York State with Rakhee, but she doesn't want to. Any questions for DrClyde?
Yeah, I think you mentioned intermittent fasting a couple of times, and people have the idea that during intermittent fasting, it breaks down body fat. Is that a myth, or is there any validity to that? Oh,
no, you burn a lot of fat when you don't eat. The problem is that until you go into ketosis, there's an episode of time where you burn more muscle than the fat. And so if you're not doing ketosis and fasting, I've had people come to me for help who fast so that they can eat more pizza. They're not doing keto fasting, right? So 6 hours after a healthy meal, your body, the nutrients start to deplete in your bloodstream. So 6 to 8 hours later, your cells are in the fasted state. And the lysosomes start eating up the damaged proteins. So it's like a cellular cleanse. Fasting's good. But after 6 hours of that, you're losing a lot of functional proteins. And that's the problem. Now you're losing muscle mass as much or more than the body fat. And that's your fat burning machinery. So you're losing your fat burning machinery trying to burn fats. Well, at first, the number on the scale drops really fast because you're not eating at all. But once you start eating, when you stop doing that, you're going to go up in body fat faster than ever to a higher level of body fat than ever because you lost some muscle mass. You're whittling away too much at your lean tissue. So caloric restriction spread out through the day doesn't do that. If you restrict calories by 25% and you space the calories out, it doesn't have to be even. It can be just a snack for breakfast. You don't have to have what people would call a breakfast. It could just be a snack. I call it a protect lean tissue snack, PLT, protect lean tissue. A little bit of protein, A little bit of a slow digesting carbohydrate, like let's say a hard-boiled egg and a plum, or a glass of milk or some yogurt. Dairy has equal amounts of both. If it's soy milk, then you'd still need the plum or the apricot, right? So a little bit of a protein, a little bit of a carbohydrate, and you're on your way. And if that's all you're eating, then maybe you want to have lunch earlier so that you don't lose lean tissue towards the end of the morning. So it's very easy to just engineer your snack so it's 100, 150 calories and you're out the door. What's interesting about that to me is that your cells are still in the fasted state. A 100-calorie snack leaves your body mainly in the fasted state. But we have this deranged way of thinking about fasting that you can't let anything past your mouth. You can't even have a small healthy snack to keep your body going. Like if you wanted your car to keep going and wanted it to be as light as possible, you would put in just 1 liter of gas every hour or two, right? You would just trickle it in. And that's what I'm talking about, is trickling it in so that you don't lose the muscle mass while you burn the fat. Now, if you're going to drop your calories by 50% or more, and that's going to move you to the 800 calorie mark, which in the scientific community is called a very low calorie diet. The only way any study gets ethics approval for that is with regular medical oversight. So that's your limiter. No matter how healthy your food is, if you're only eating half of what your body needs, then you're at risk for some of your parameters starting to drop. If you're not having a doctor regularly look at you, and I mean like on a daily basis, then it's 1/4 of your calories. So this gives us a limit for healthy weight loss of 1/4 of our calories, which then raises the question, well, how many calories do you need? Well, for people, it's usually 1,200 to 2,400 calories. Let's call it 1,600. So if you cut calories by 400, that would take 10 days to lose your body fat, assuming that you don't drop your metabolic rate in the effort, which means that there's at least a trickle flow of nutrients. So now you finally benefit from your caloric restriction. The worst case scenario is that you're working hard and getting nowhere.
Dr. Wilson, we have so many more questions, but unfortunately the time really, it's over. But before you go, I mean, first of all, I want to thank you tremendously for your knowledge, your time. You're definitely making us reflect on so much. But before you go, I really, really need you to share some of where people can reach out to you, or they can see some of your information. I mean, so many things that I know you want to help people. And that was one of the reasons why we wanted you to be part of this podcast, which again, personally, I really, really thank you very, very much.
Thank you for that. You know, it's been a long journey for me. I suffered metabolically as a kid. And then when I got to the aircraft carrier in the Navy, they told me you're obese, your cholesterol's over 300, you're in trouble. It's been a long journey. And so I have tremendous compassion for anyone who is struggling, either with overtraining, with weight loss. This comes from a very deep place for me. This is not an academic exercise. So if you're wanting a consultation or you want to sign up for one of my Stanford classes, I've got a website for that, DrClydeWilson.com, DrClydeWilson.com. But what I'm most proud of, what I most want to share with people is free information. I'm having a blast making content with people like this right here. And for that, you go to metabolicflow.com. Metabolicflow.com.
Okay.
Rakhee, anything from your part?
Well, no, you pretty much said it all.
So, Dr. Wilson, again, thank you very much. And I'm pretty sure we're gonna, I mean, I hope you give us the chance of another program, because there is so much that people need to, I mean, that I need to listen, that people need to listen in order to make us reflect. I mean, the stuff that you share with us, it's gonna make me, it's been making me reflect already so much, because I'm really not doing things correctly, even though I thought that I was feeding myself properly. But just like I said, you know, eating healthy food is not necessarily making me a healthier person, because I'm not eating it properly.
You're being too hard on yourself, Juan, and I'm the same way. So
I really need
and you can help them with that, I'm sure.
Again.
So let's close with a question for you. So if we did this once a month and we made a channel, what would we call it?
What would we call it? That's
something with
a very
metabolism.
nice question. And if I have to come up with an answer at this moment, I will call it eating
metabolic
for a better life. Metabolic flow.
Now that's the name of my website, and I'm happy to call it that.
What would you call it?
But if you come up with something else,
yeah.
Oh, a name for this.
no, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I meant it partly as a joke, but in terms of doing a monthly, I'm totally serious. Totally
Okay.
serious.
Okay, metabolic wellness.
There you go.
Yeah,
I like
it. I like it. So, well, again, thanks for everything, and I'm pretty sure we're gonna be, talking again.
Much appreciated.